Good morning YouTube and welcome back to the channel and episode 6 of Project Hoonigrom. So as you can see, the bike is loosely being thrown back together. At the weekend I had my good friend Sanj come down. He brought his R1 in, so we did a full service on the bike, and the problem was I had everything under the bench and obviously bits just everywhere, so I thought it made more sense just to put it back together and then we could throw it off the ramp. So it's the first time it's seen daylight in a few months, that's for sure. But really pleased with the progress in this episode. As you'll see, we've done things like the brake reservoir, the new front brake hose, the fuel tank is done, and a quick sneak peek of how the carb's gonna sit coming out the bodywork. And my friend kindly repaid her, well, he didn't even have to repay the favour, but I helped him pick up a bike and he had a custom made jacket made for me for the project, which I'm really thrilled with. So big thanks to Spence for that. And yeah, let's get this episode underway and take you back about 2 weeks. New episode and new parts. Well, not really parts, just bits and bobs, I guess. So for those that know me will know I should really be the international seller of JB World. Love the stuff. And before you guys start wondering what this is for, it's going to be for the radiator temperature sensor. So rather than try and weld or risk warping the radiator, especially as I can't weld, this stuff will be able to bond that temperature sensor in place, and it's rated for up to 280 degrees. So ultimately, that radiator, if it gets more than 130 degrees through it, is a good chance we're going to blow the motor up. So this should be absolutely fine. Famous last words, we'll cut back to this if it does fail. I've got some M6 nuts and some M6 stud to drill 2 holes to mount the HT like coil pack lead and the CDI to the other side. So that's going to be the first job, well, in amongst the monstrous mess of a wiring loom that I need to start creating to work with the standard Grom parts. But yeah, shall we get underway? Unfortunately, the CDI, which is the sort of engine control unit for the bike, is a slightly different width to the coil over on that side. So I'm going to have to put another hole in the frame for a mounting point here for this one, and then trim this stud down. But long term, I'm going to get some proper spacers built up in there and obviously some correct length bolts. But this is just for the mocking up stage to work out the lengths. It makes life a lot easier, especially it was literally a couple of quid for some stud and some nuts. So I'll drill that through now, mark where that is, and then we can lock that up, and then I can start dressing the wiring loom all onto the frame. The wiring loom is in. Unfortunately, I did make the decision not to film this because I knew it was going to be lots of faffing about. But essentially, you can see I've got the kill switch in place. The loom runs down. I've used the original plug off the ignition. So essentially to start the bike, in theory, we'll find out, you turn the key on and you will need the kill switch in place. So either if the key's off or the kill switch is off, the bike's not going to start. So for example, if the kill switch is on, I park the bike, put the steering lock on, you shouldn't be able to start it. Well, that's my thought process anyway. But like I said, a lot of this is lined up really nicely with all the coil pack on there. Once those brackets go in for the engine mounts, we can start strapping the rest of the loom back, which is in there. But really pleased with it overall, if I'm honest. It's looking really smart. I mean, I've still got a lot of work to do on the headlight connection loom, which we'll come back to in a second. But as you can see, CDI mounted down there, the loom's just taped up in place for now. I need to get proper measured nuts and bolts and spacers for all this, but it's worked well for the mocking up. And as you can see, this loom that comes off the stator generator on the bike will all be clipped back to that bracket once it's in place. But back to the headlight. So from what I can make out, we've got side light, low beam, high beam connector for the main light. There's also lights on there to say if the high beam or low beam's activated, and then we've got the switch gear, which we've got to chop off. But this plug, I mean, it is just an absolute state. The cables have started pulling out of it. So what I have got down here is some much nicer, proper waterproof ones. Got the full kit to pin it up, so should be able to make a nice little plug there instead. And then once again, as I say with this project, at this stage the bike is very much in its sort of rough build stage, because I want to see if it works like this, and if it does, everything gets stripped back down. All the loom will be dressed properly, because some of the cables are a little bit longer than I'd like them to be, but at the moment that is the least of the problem. So the next job will be to firstly hoover all the swarf out that I've drilled around, because we don't want that to get into any cavities, and then take the spark plug out. I'm going to put a little bit of two-stroke oil down the barrel, because it's going to be a couple more weeks before it fires. And then I'm just going to do a quick dry kick over and see if we get spark on the spark plug. Because if we do, that means the wiring loom has been installed successfully. It's a pretty straightforward system, so I'd like to think so, but you just never know with this sort of thing. But the next video, hopefully, will be a quick kick over and we can see whether we've got spark. So hopefully you could see in the GoPro footage there that we had a spark. Great news. So that means that all the wiring's working as hoped. Obviously now the real one is put fuel in the carb, and in theory that bad boy would fire. The only problem is obviously I wouldn't want to kick it hard under compression on cable ties on the back, and we obviously do need to put the exhaust on. But once the mounts are in place, I mean, I've got the specially dented up exhaust ready now. This would fire. I mean, it looks like it anyway. We've got spark, so pretty straightforward. With the radiator loosely in place, just hanging there on that top pivot point, we call it customized. I've got one of the old KTM coolant hoses. Now, I'm using this because it's got a nice sharp radius bend to bring it back out of the way, because the expansion pipe is all going to be below here. So hopefully, as you can see, I've put a black mark on the bit I'm going to sacrifice, maybe go a little bit higher. And we've also had, excuse the mess, some large universal coolant hose turn up. So the final finished piece, we will need to get some proper custom hoses. I'm not sure who to use yet for this, but obviously at this stage of the game, again, it's not something that's too major, and we're going to put that coolant temp sender in the top of the radiator as well. So unfortunately, my generic hose that I've bought, which is just, I say, a generic coolant hose, isn't giving a nice radio around there at all. The ratio, unfortunately, when it bends, it starts to put a pinch in. So what my plan is to buy two silicone 45 degrees, or no, 90 degrees even, sorry, that'll go there and down. But I'm not a big fan of that. I'd rather have like swooping bends, but the problem is until I get a custom one built, they're just pinching up. And as soon as you start pinching the hose, you're going to restrict the flow worse than the 90-degree bend. Now, the other thing, which we're not going to install now, is the factory KTM thermostat. So I've got room if I wanted to put it in there. What a thermostat does, if you're not aware, is it slows the flow down until the coolant's up to temperature. I don't think I'm going to have an issue with cold temps. I think it's going to be getting too hot, especially with the smaller radiator. But all part of the fun. I'll get those ordered now, and in the magic of YouTube editing, hopefully the next time we see this clip, we'll have the pipes in. And then we are literally just waiting on those engine mounts to be able to secure the radiator in place. Okay, so last night I finished up, it was cold, dark, wet, and just before I put everything away, I remembered that the EXC had some sort of Speedo. I assumed it was just a cheap eBay one, but it didn't work, wasn't powering up. Last night, turns out you can unclip it. I had one of the batteries on the shelf, little tiny like watch battery thing, put it in and, So I set the mileage, just roughly, I didn't do any accuracy, but I'll set it to 3,730 to match the Grom, so I know what the mileage is on the chassis of the bike. It's got Speedo, a timer, a clock. It comes with a magnetic sensor, and I've put the little magnet on there as well. And my thinking is, on the original Grom, it has an ABS sensor. If I make something to mount in there, drill one of these out, we can put the magnet on there. And I did a quick test with swiping this sensor past the little magnet, and it's picking up a reading. So that means I can have this for the Speedo and mileage, and obviously the water temp gauge. So yeah, pretty chuffed with that, but I'll say we'll come back to that later in the video. So a quick look at the temperature sender in there. I mean, I'm going to be honest and say I thought it was going to go smoother, but the good news is I've keyed this up here. I did it off camera with a small file. That is not going to leak. I'll be shocked if that leaks. And as you probably saw in the video, I used a little bit of cable tie plastic just to touch underneath and around the thread, so it's got a good hook on there. I can't see that having any issues at all. So the next step is going to be mounting that Speedo that I managed to get working with a new battery and the temperature gauge. Now you'll remember the acrylic that we used to mock the mounts up. I'm going to try and build a little dash. That's easy, a little flat plate, but I'd love to be able to shape something off there that gives it a little fly screen. I mean, I know you can bend and shape acrylic. I'll probably have to go a little bit slimmer, down to about 2 mil as opposed to 5, but for actually making the mount to go on there, this should have then allowed me to have the clocks mounted and nice and lightweight too. Well, boys and girls and non-identifiers, this is what you call service. Ordered on Saturday afternoon, I think it was. Tuesday morning, we have my custom hose with the requested ends as we built on the last episode. And something I was going to dig out of the cupboard is I've got new copper washers as well. So really excited to get this on. We'll have a quick look now and see how it fits. And there we have it, the Hell Performance brake line in place. Now I did end up cable tying these back here. Don't worry, these are NASA rated tie wraps, so they ain't going anywhere. In hindsight, probably should have gone a bit longer and had it come up, and then I could have mounted it through the front and had a nice amount of run. But to be honest with you, it looks trick, really trick. And obviously once that cow's on there anyway, you're not going to see that. And there's the bend there, so that when the forks compress, the plan is that the cable or hose even then will just allow the movement between the fork travel. But yeah, really chuffed with that. Going to get it bled up now, and then hopefully we will have the ABS delete complete. And that is the ABS delete complete. Nice solid brake lever all the way down to the caliper. Now normally what I do is give it a good really hard squeeze and then hold it for about 10-15 seconds, which you've already done, and then just check all the fittings to make sure that we've got no leaks and everything looks absolutely perfect. So good job and well done to Hell for getting them out in rapid time. First look at the sort of fly screen, I guess. It's one of those things, I saw it going a lot better in my head, but I think that's been the pattern for today, unfortunately. But the good news is, I'm really happy with the temperature gauge, Speedo, mileometer, but there's obviously going to need to be some sort of plate fabricated here. Probably make it out of 2mm alley sheet, and I can go back to the drawing board, get it designed a bit smoother, maybe make a nice rounder top. I think would look more cosmetically appeasing. Another word? I don't know. But it's been a long day. It shows it's doable without obviously going too mad, and it then gives me a bit of a chance to really play with it. Again, I might keep it vertical and just go with like a, so it looks like a motocross number board round. Really don't know. Let me know in the comments what you think. But looking at that, I mean, that's pretty cool. So we've got to have a Speedo, temperature gauge, mileage on there. Fuel tank's back on, because obviously got to dry it and tap the fuel tap in there, or nipple on there that's coming hopefully tomorrow. And then looms in, hoover all that swarf off of there that I've made a mess with where I was drilling. The hoses have started to turn up. I've ordered an 8mm clear and a little cap to complete the brake reservoir delete on the rear. And I've also got some 6mm, which I've just put on the carburetor now just to have a look how it fits, and that all seems to be really nice and flexible. It looks maybe a little bit thin, but this stuff has been rated for use with petrol according to the advert, so it's going to be a disaster if it all starts melting and fuel leaks everywhere. But it's all part of the testing, and so we'll rig up the rear brake line now, and then the next job will be to get that fuel tank drilled and a nipple put on that, which I've got one like this, and I've got a brass one coming as well, which has got a bigger head on it, which I think will seat nicer into the bottom of the tank. But that way we'll just have a takeoff. I haven't got a fuel tap at the moment, which isn't really good practice for a carved bike, but we can put an inline filter in there if needs be. With the fuel pump assembly removed, you can see the pump just over there, and the other thing on the left is the level sender, so it tells you how much fuel's in there, which unfortunately we can't use with a KTM. I've opened up the top part of the pump. In an ideal world, I would like to weld this or get a disc that fits in there and closes it up, but again, this is all just going to be to get us on the road and going now because we're getting so close. I've just used some fuel line, and you can see a rubber plug through the middle of it and a bolt as well to keep it in there, and that is tight, so I'll just put some clips around either side as well to stop that moving. But essentially that means we have a plug. And off camera I also completely drained the tank out and then flushed it through with brake cleaner and airlined it, because we're going to drill the bottom of it now, and the last thing we want is any vapours to ignite and end up doing a bit of a pop on the bench. So that's all cleaned. We'll get the tap in the bottom, as I said, I've got a brass one coming as well, but this will do. It's exactly the same size measurements, and we can get the hole in, and then we've got a nipple on the tank to have fuel. You've got the standard breather, which we'll keep there, which allows for, obviously, as the fuel is drawn down, air to come back into the tank, but it may need to have a one-way valve put on there, because if the bike goes over, it could potentially leak out of there. With the nice hole drilled, this would now fit in here lovely, and as you can see, the seal, let's try and get that to focus, sits on there, but if I push, it sort of pushes past it. So the other one I've got coming, the other nipple, it's got a bigger head on it to stop that happening. So once that's locked in, it also comes with a proper sealing washer. That will hopefully be a fuel supply for the carb. Now, obviously I'm going to have to brake clean all that out again, because the last thing I want is any drilling swarf going in through the carb. But yeah, I think it's pretty cool. We've got a cover now to plate that hole up until the final version will obviously be made, which will be the nice finished one. But again, very much the test piece, and as you can probably see, some little bits of swarf in there, so we definitely want to wash that out. But yeah, really happy with that. We get the tank back on, and that's another job ticked off the list. Before we put fuel in the tank, I do want to check that there's a good seal. So the cap's been put on, the breather's got a bit of pipe, which I'm just going to charge my air compressor up to around 15-20 psi. The cap's obviously all blocked off, which will be in its road setting, and then I've just covered the fuel supply nipple just with a bit of pipe there as well. So what I'll do is charge that with some air now. Hopefully it stays airtight, in which case I'm ready to throw it on the bike. Next on the job list is working out the wiring on the headlight, because everything in this 2017 Grom is LED. So you've got a main plug here for the lighting. Try and do this one-handed. Pull it out. It's just more loom. So I'm going to have a look first to see if I can open up the headlight and figure it out, because the wiring diagram doesn't really make a great deal of sense for me, unfortunately. So I'm assuming it's just 12-volt LED, but let's strip it apart and see if we can actually have a look inside and how the workings of this are going to work with trying to transfer it over to the EXC loom. It's another day on Project Hoonigrom, and as you can see, the headlight that I last rigged up, I got a rough idea of what the cables were doing, trying to look at the wiring diagram, but I was struggling with these remaining ones. Now, thanks to the kind people of the Hoonigrom Owners Club, I think we have worked out what they do from the wiring diagram, and we're going to try and rig that up today. Now, if I've got that wrong, it's going to be £100 to £150 day out for a new headlight, which won't be ideal. And we've had some new packages turn up. We've got a sprocket, the brake tube plug, and some fuel hose. So plenty to get on with again today. Well, that didn't go to plan. If the eagle-eye spotters on the GoPro saw, I got a flash off of one of them, which could have been it going pop, and then I'm getting nothing off of high beam or anything. But even I've had a look at the wiring diagram, which I'll overlay now, and it makes sense that what we've done is a negative, unless I've just got the wrong way around. I don't know. It wouldn't make sense because you'd blow them up going the other way. But yeah, who knows? Who knows? So it looks like I've probably fried the unit, but well, no, that's pretty rubbish. The good news is there's places online that do aftermarket high intensity bulb kits, so we can just put one of those in the original cluster. From excuse me, what I've seen is you've got to heat the lenses up at these tabs, and then there's a glue on there and it can pull out, and we can just service the whole lot. But yeah, a little bit frustrating. I was hoping that was just going to be straight in to the EXC loom and we were going to have lights. But as with projects like this, you're always going to be learning as you go along. And just before we go, the JB Weld has smoothed off nicely on that temp sender, looking much better than when I last saw it. So yeah, let's crack on with some more jobs. Now we've gone 2 steps forwards and 1 step backwards with the light. As you can see, the tail light unit was much more straightforward. 12 volt, straight to it. We've got the obviously main light and the brake light working nicely on there. And we've obviously also got the indicators and the rear number plate light. So this is for the brake light, which is all wired in now to the original KTM loom. It also shares an earth for indicators, rear number plate light, which we've got to rig up still, but pretty happy with that. Looks really nice and OEM in there, and that'll all just tuck into there with the tail loom, and fingers crossed we've got that all right. Another one on the to-do list was getting the correct size rear sprocket. Now, the KTM runs a 520 pitch as standard, and don't quote me, I think it's like a 430. I don't think it was a 420. It's something like that, but it's obviously a lot smaller, and the chain wouldn't be suitable because we've got a 520 on the front. We're going to run a 520 chain, and we're going to need a 520 sprocket. Now again, another one from the owners clubs. I mean, obviously the headlight didn't go very well just then, so hopefully this link is the right one. So the part number for this is JTR 279.33. so the 33 is the amount of teeth. Again, and probably a miscalculation on my half, but this could work out to an advantage, is this is a 34 tooth standard, but what I didn't factor in is obviously it's a much smaller pitch, so it's a smaller sprocket, whereas this has got less teeth, but diameter wise, it is a lot bigger. So my concerns are gearing. So the stock KTM EXC gearing is 50 or 52 teeth, so we've dropped roughly 20 teeth, but obviously we've got a much smaller rear wheel, so I don't want the bike to be topping out at like 50-60 mile an hour, but we've got this here now. It's going to allow us to mess around with getting a chain on it and see how everything lines up. So I'm going to go ahead and fit that, and then fingers crossed the bolt pattern is suitable. Continuing on with the trimming, I need to make the CBR radiator fit where the original airbox once sat. So this is essentially what goes onto the fuel tank. Sits there like that. Around the back, we've got enough room, but I'm gonna need to chop potentially all this out of here for the radiator cap, and a little bit on this side as well. So that's gonna be the next job now.